The night the millionaire cowboy found the freezing nurse at the train station was the kind of night people later swore had been scripted by fate itself. Snow came down thick and slow, muting the world, turning the small station on the edge of Wyoming into something that felt forgotten by time. The clock above the platform ticked loudly, each second echoing in the empty space like a warning that no one was coming. Jackson Cole hadn't planned to be there. Men like him rarely waited at train stations anymore. At 42, Jackson owned more land than some towns could see from end to end. His cattle ranch stretched across miles of rolling plains, his name known in business circles from Denver to Dallas. Newspapers liked to call him the last millionaire cowboy, a title he hated but never bothered correcting. He preferred the quiet authority of dirt under his boots and wind across his face. That night, his private jet was grounded by a sudden blizzard, and the last rental car within 50 miles had been claimed. The train was supposed to be a simple solution, one ride east, then another driver waiting. Simple had never meant easy in Jackson's life, and as he stepped onto the deserted platform, he had a feeling the night wasn't finished with him yet. He noticed her because she was sitting far too still. Most people waiting in the cold paced, stomped their feet, wrapped scarves tighter. She sat on a metal bench near the far wall, arms folded tightly around herself, head bowed. Her coat was thin, more suited for fall than the dead of winter, and snow had settled into her dark hair like a cruel decoration. At first, Jackson thought she might be asleep. Then he saw her shoulders shudder. He hesitated. He wasn't a man who interfered lightly. Wealth had taught him that every step forward invited expectations, gratitude, sometimes resentment. But something about the way she seemed to shrink into herself pulled at him harder than caution ever could. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice rough from years of cold mornings and shouting over cattle. Her head lifted slowly. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from being alone too long. I'm fine," she said, though her teeth chattered hard enough to betray the lie. Jackson frowned. "You don't look fine." She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Instinct took over. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and caught her before she hit the concrete. She was lighter than he expected, fragile in a way that made his chest tighten. "I didn't mean," she began, embarrassed, trying to pull away. "Easy," he said gently. "Sit back down." Her name was Emily Carter. She was a nurse, traveling to start a new job in Cheyenne. Her car had broken down hours earlier, her phone battery had died, and the last train had been delayed indefinitely due to the storm. She'd spent most of the night telling herself she could handle it, that nurses handled worse every day. Hypothermia, however, was an enemy she knew too well, and her body was losing the fight. Jackson shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders without asking. "This isn't optional," he said when she protested weakly. "You need the warmth more than I do." They sat like that for a moment, the storm howling outside, the station lights flickering overhead. Emily's breathing slowly steadied as he'd returned to her fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah," he replied quietly. "I did." The train never came that night. By morning, the station manager finally arrived and declared all routes canceled. Jackson arranged a ride without hesitation. When he learned Emily had nowhere to go until the roads reopened, he offered her a place to stay on his ranch as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She stared at him, shocked. "I don't even know you." "Name's Jackson Cole," he said. "You'll know me better after breakfast." Against her better judgment, and with few options left, she agreed. The ranch was everything Emily imagined and more. Snow-covered fences stretched into the horizon, horses moved like ghosts through the morning fog, and the main house stood solid and warm against the storm. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and something that felt like safety. Days passed. The storm lingered. Emily helped where she could, cooking meals, tending to an injured ranch hand with the practiced calm of someone who had dedicated her life to healing others. Jackson watched her quietly, noticing the way she spoke gently to the animals, the way her laughter surprised her as much as it did him. She learned that Jackson had built his fortune from nothing. Orphaned young, he'd worked ranches across the West, saving every dollar, buying land inch by inch. He wasn't just wealthy, he was disciplined, principled, lonely in a way he rarely acknowledged. They talked late into the nights, sitting by the fire. Emily told him about losing her parents early, about choosing nursing because it made the world feel less cruel. Jackson told her about the cost of success, how money could build walls faster than it built bridges. When the roads finally cleared, Emily packed her bag with shaking hands. The thought of leaving felt heavier than the storm itself. "I should go," she said softly. "My job starts soon." Jackson nodded, jaw tight. "Yeah, I figured." She hesitated at the door. "What happened at that station? It mattered to me." "You mattered." He met her gaze, something raw and unguarded crossing his face. "You mattered to me too." They parted without promises, both believing that life would pull them back into its separate currents. It didn't. Fate, however, had other plans. Weeks later, Jackson collapsed during a cattle inspection. A silent heart condition he never knew he had brought him to the edge of death. The nearest hospital was short-staffed. Emily was on duty that night. She recognized his name before she saw his face. When they wheeled him in, pale and unconscious, her hands trembled, but only for a second. Then training took over. She worked with relentless focus, refusing to let him slip away. Hours later, when he finally stabilized, she sat by his bed long after her shift ended. When Jackson woke, the first thing he saw was her sleeping in the chair beside him, his old coat folded carefully in her lap. Their love didn't explode into headlines immediately. It grew quietly, stubbornly, the way strong things always do. Emily moved to the ranch. Jackson learned to lean on someone else without feeling weak. They challenged each other, argued, laughed, healed old wounds neither had known were still bleeding. When Jackson proposed, he didn't do it with diamonds or helicopters. He did it at the same train station, now renovated and warm, on the same bench where he'd found her freezing years before. She said yes through tears. Their wedding was small, but their story wasn't. A journalist picked it up by chance. "Millionaire Cowboy finds freezing nurse at train station," became a headline shared across the world. People called it unbelievable. People called it hope. They called it history because it reminded millions that love didn't care about wealth or timing or storms. It cared about showing up when someone was cold, about choosing kindness when walking away was easier, about holding on when life tried its hardest to pull people apart. Years later, Emily would sometimes sit on the ranch porch, watching Jackson ride out across the land, snow or sun, and think about that night. About how close she'd been to disappearing into the cold. About how one question, "You all right, ma'am?" had changed everything. And Jackson, the last millionaire cowboy, would always say that all the land, all the money, all the power he'd earned meant nothing compared to the moment he decided to stop and care.